Welcome back to the Strategic Farm East here in Suffolk. We're delighted to be back and sharing with you the results from Harvest 2020. Here we're hosted by Brian Barker at EJ Barker and Sons on our strategic farm covering the east of England. Brian is in his third of 6 years. Harvest 2020 is just coming to the end of that, and we're here today to share the results. Strategic farms are all about putting research into practice, and Brian's going to share with you a season overview and then some updates in more detail on the results of the trials that we've seen.
So the role of the strategic farm across the country, but here in the east, has been to bring research onto farm and look at different subjects which have been sort of talked about within the industry, and if we can sort of demonstrate how we can change the methods that we do on farm to benefit the wider scale and the wider industry. 2020 was probably one of the most difficult seasons that I've encountered as a farmer. We had a very wet autumn, so the establishment of crops were very challenging, and that had a knock-on effect to the actual demonstrations and trials that we did on farm. We then went into a very dry spring, and very challenging. Caused more problems because we were then worrying about lack of water, but also meant that we had a very low disease year as well. So it actually meant that we could spend less, and so but that again had knock-on effects to the trials that we were trying to deliver on farm. So if we looked at all the different trials that we did on the farm this year in 2020 before the pandemic hit, which then caused another headache, because we couldn't have people coming on farm to do the analysis and the research, and that's why we're talking to you through the camera lens instead of having an open day and a results meeting. We did a trial at the start which was placement fertiliser. This was running for the last couple of years to see if we could manipulate the plants going into the winter by using place fertiliser. This was something that we were sort of looking at because all the farming talk has been to delay drilling because of blackgrass, because of BYDV, and how can we get a really strong, healthy plant going into winter was what we were looking at, and could we manipulate it with place fertiliser at planting. The previous couple of years, it showed early indications that where we placed fertiliser, we got more tillers, but that never transferred into actual yield at the end of the day. And again, this season, it showed those sort of indications as well. We had bigger, stronger plants where the fertiliser did do some benefit. When it was actually placed, when it was broadcast, there was not as much benefit. But then when we actually came to combining it, there was no real yield benefit. And so we sort of come to the conclusion that yes, in really wet conditions, then maybe it does help, but to actually say that you're going to get a yield benefit, then not so much. So it's how you integrate that method of fertiliser placement or fertiliser application into the farming system that you're adopting. If you're in sort of reduced soil movement and different establishment techniques, then maybe it's going to benefit you in different ways. Obviously we can't apply any nitrogen in the autumn, and so that's another thing, another restriction that we've got to farm within. We then also did an experiment of different input regimes through the spring. So we were looking at a very low input investment for fungicides, PGRs and trace elements. This was a carry on from last year's, which showed some really good information about how you can alter your levels of investment. So we had a strip of untreated across 5 varieties. We had a low input investment. We had a medium, which was relatively the farm standard. And then we had a very high input where we were actually throwing more expense and more expensive chemistry at the different 5 varieties, working up and down 2 tram lines. These all then got combined, and then they were plot combined to give us some yield data. With the poor establishment in the autumn, we found that this was going to give us probably some not really good data because of the poor establishment. So parts of the field did very well and other parts didn't do as well, probably more because of the establishment rather than the actual inputs we put onto it. Early indications from the results that I've seen showing that the untreated and the very low inputs were the best gross margins and net margin, just because we had such a low disease pressure during the spring with a very dry spring, and the biomass never really got going, and so that the humid conditions of different disease transfer never actually came through. So we then also had a field which we classed as our very low, how low we can go input field. This was off the back of last year's 5 varieties, low input and untreated, showed that those were the best returns. So I said, well, can I try and do it on a field scale? And so we did that, and we actually had it all the way through the season, where we had very low inputs with fungicide. We only spent about £14 on fungicide for that field, less on fertiliser, less on PGRs, less on trace elements, and that was one of the highest yielding fields that we had on the farm when it came to harvest. So it was one of those things that really opened my eyes to what could be delivered by actually reducing our inputs in a very dry season when the disease pressure was low. So it's one of those things that when we think about lowering our inputs, it's about evaluating risk. I wouldn't want to have my whole farm like it, but you can pick the right variety, pick the right location, pick the right timings to actually cut back. And I think we actually saw an adverse effect of when we applied the higher rates of fungicide and PGRs. It was actually detrimental to our crops in the field this year, with the harvest just gone. So that's an interesting sort of subplot that we've sort of been seeing when we're trying to lower our inputs. We've also done the flowering strips and the beneficial insects and pollinators. That's been an interesting start. And then we've also got looking at baselining, soil structure, soil health, and then we've also got the cover crops and nitrate trials going on. So there's loads going on here at Strategic Farm East, but 2020 has been a difficult year, not just for trials, with COVID and the pandemic, and it's been a struggle at times, but we got through it, and now we're looking forward to 2021.
So following on from what Brian said, the results are all going to be available through Strategic Farm Week. You've got the annual report to download that's got all the information and the details from the graphs and the costs and the take-home messages, the trial results that have come from the trials that we've done here at the Strategic Farm this year. You can join the seminar sessions through the week to discuss the results in more detail and take part through the website, through Twitter, and getting involved. Look forward to sharing the results with you as we go through the week.